At Buffalo Wild Wings, they'll admit they often go overboard with their limited-time offerings. They just can't help themselves. Take their new signature sampler. You get wings and 3 shareable options like fried pickles or cheese curds. Then there's their aptly named over-the-top nachos, a literal mountain of crispy tortilla chips loaded with your choice of pulled pork or honey barbecued grilled chicken, jalapenos, and more. Then top it all off with their new Platinum Margarita. Go overboard with them today at Buffalo Wild Wings. Wings, beer, sports. Available for a limited time while supplies last. Please drink responsibly.
Mental Health News Radio, produced by MHNRnetwork.com, your source for information about our favorite subject, mental health. This show is brought to you by our incredible sponsors like ZenCharts.com, the intelligent EHR for addiction treatment organizations, and MyGenetics, that's MyGenetx.com, changing the way people are diagnosed and treated around the world, helping you better understand what makes you well. Don't you want information about yourself that empowers your mental health treatment? Also, who is minding the store, the finances of your behavioral health organization? TriadicLLC.com, that's TriadicLLC.com, is a full-service revenue cycle management and billing company focused on all the ins and outs of mental health billing. Our sponsors help keep this show on the air and advocating for everyone affected by mental health. Guess who that is? Everyone in the world. Take a listen to our show all the way to the end. You don't want to miss Miles the Therapy Dog's special goodbye. Hey everyone, this is Kristin Walker, host of Mental Health News Radio, and I'm very excited to talk about something that we've gotten a lot of emails about from listeners, and it has to do with scapegoating. I'm excited because we have counselor Glynis Sherwood here with us. Glynnis, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome, Kristin.
So tell our listeners, just so they know who we're interviewing, a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been in the counseling field for about 20 years, went into private practice in 2009, and at the time I was just sort of working as a generic counselor and hadn't really found my areas of specialty yet, but over time, the kind of folks who tended to gravitate towards me are people who came from backgrounds where there was childhood emotional abuse and neglect, including family scapegoating, which is just another word for family bullying. And so that became more and more my focal point. You know, it's more like a niche that arose out of coincidence than by planning. But that's the way it tended to occur in my life, and along with those kinds of issues, I guess you could say that the kinds of people I've been working with are people who've been struggling with unresolved trauma issues, low self-worth, identity confusion, relationship difficulties, or another word for that, I guess you could say, would be attachment problems, and chronic grief and inappropriate guilt and shame, all of that stemming from childhood emotional abuse and neglect.
Yeah, and can you explain to people, that term scapegoat? It's used a lot in people that have suffered from narcissistic abuse, and so I think it's a term that gets thrown around, but it's not really as well defined as it needs to be.
Well, it's an old biblical term, and people may know that much about it. It comes from the Bible, where, especially the Old Testament, where it was typical for a community that rather than dealing with the crimes or sins that were going on within the community, chose a target or a scapegoat, and in antiquity that literally was a goat who would be sacrificed with the hope that all of the badness would be taken away without anybody really dealing internally with what might have been going on that contributed to the problem, So it literally was a sacrifice by death. And, that term has been transported into the 21st century, and in my work to mean more family bullying. So in scapegoating, we typically see one, although there can be more than one person who's targeted by family, or it can be a revolving scapegoat. One person is picked on for a while, and then maybe they exit the scene, or something happens, and then somebody else is then becomes the focal point. But I think that the dynamic is similar to the old biblical mentality, which is that the victim is responsible for carrying the sins of the family, so that the family doesn't have to look look internally at the problems that are creating dysfunction in the first place. So as a result of that, the target's blamed, shamed, ostracized and punished if they don't go along with the scapegoating. So it's a total no-win situation for the person who happens to find themselves in this unfortunate dynamic. And the other part of this, which and will probably be of interest to your viewers, is that these dynamics don't happen in healthy families.
Right.
What I frequently see is adults who come from narcissistic families, in some cases sociopathic, one or more sociopathic people in the family. Often there's a history of addiction, although I think that that's probably a secondary issue where
right.
the narcissists are using substances or behaviors to medicate their personality problem.
Yeah.
So that tends to be the background from which these scapegoats are born into, and unfortunately, it's usually people who are very ill-equipped to bring children into the world in the first place who end up being the parents of the scapegoat. And the other thing that's very interesting about scapegoats is that they're quite frequently, although not always, the most mentally healthy member of their family, and often they're also the highest functioning, but yet they're singled out as the loser, the misfit, the idiot. The mental defective,
right.
and
one who's mentally ill. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And often these are people I find who have like PhDs and are, have gone on to create their own lovely family dynamic and, are actually doing a lot better. So there can be a lot of jealousy that fuels this too, because the thing about scapegoats is that they just won't learn their place,
Right.
Which creates ongoing conflict.
It's interesting to see in those families where it's sort of like hot potato with who's going to be the scapegoat, to see when someone really stops being the scapegoat, like done the work. They've gone to see someone like you as an example, and they really aren't it anymore. There's a whole different dynamic of anger and jealousy from the others that haven't gotten out of that loop. When one of you says, there's a shift. I mean, I've been in that shift myself. I actually remember the day that I stopped being the family scapegoat and someone else took it on. And I felt they were the one trying to put it on me always. And I felt so bad for them because I thought, God, I know how you're feeling right now. It feels awful, but I'm not going to wear that anymore. And it's your choice to wear it now, but I'm just not gonna. So that's an interesting dynamic too.
Yeah, absolutely. And none of these families like a whistleblower,
No.
So,
yeah.
And that usually rains down more punishment, as the person who has been the identified scapegoat steps more and more into defining who they are and, improving their mental health. There tends to be a backlash and people scrambling to try to pressure and push the person back into the role of being the family victim. So then again, the status quo can be maintained. But you're quite right. If that person exits the situation, the baton can get involuntarily passed on to somebody else, and then the whole cycle just continues.
Yeah, it continues, and you don't want to step back into it and wear that again. So it's weird to be an observer watching it, knowing, I know how awful this feels. I'm not taking that baton again, but I can see how much pain you're in, and but I'm not going to come in and relieve you of the baton anymore.
Yeah, and nor will I let you hit me with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So in those situations where, I noticed too that you had workplace bullying up on your site near the scapegoating part. How do you see that playing out? Because there's so much to do with, I've been in therapy and I know all of my friends are therapists. There's so much to do with you recreating that unhealthy family dynamic in your work environment, and then you start working out those issues there. So it's a perfect place for you to, I was bullied as a kid and scapegoated then. Well, I'm going to go have that happen again as an adult in this recreated family. So how have you seen that play out, with your patients or in your practice?
Do you mean are people who are bullied at work, do they tend to come from those kinds of families?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Not always.
Not always, but I haven't studied this, and I really don't know if anybody has in a lot of depth to be able to discern those kinds of patterns. It wouldn't surprise me that this would occur across those two scenarios more frequently than it doesn't, because I think that there can be a kind of vulnerability to the person who gets scapegoated that makes it easier for people to bully them in the first place, that can get carried over into a workplace, and then a bully or group of bullies become alerted to this, and they capitalize on it.
Yeah, to me it feels like, the vultures that are waiting for, when you're completely drained, you've got nothing left because you've been carrying all of the emotional weight of the entire family, and they want to put that on you, and then when you can't deal with it anymore, then it's time for the vultures to come in. It's not lift you up and, oh my gosh, what are we doing? It's I call it the picking of the bones at that point.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with a client that is in this situation, what are some of the things that you look at with them in order to get them to actually even see that they're being scapegoated, or that they have been the family scapegoat?
Well, by the time people reach out to me, they're usually pretty educated, and I'd say the majority of them realize that this is what's happened to them. And because I've published quite a bit in this area, people are reading my articles, and unfortunately there's a paucity of this kind of information. I think we're just at the threshold of a turning point where in society where this kind of dynamic is getting more and more coverage, that people are realizing that this is what's going on. So people come to me and they pretty much have realized, like a magic light bulb going off, that this is what's happening to them. Occasionally, some will say, I need confirmation, but my gut tells me that this is what's happening. So it's pretty much self-identified at that point. And that even though that person has sustained a lot of damage, the shock waves can hit them again on another level when they realize that they're going to have to do something about this, which may involve disconnecting from family members who are targeting them. And then there's also a lot of really difficult feelings like grief, and especially grief that comes up, as a result of this. And also, I think what I would say is, if I'm not getting ahead of myself here, you let me know, that the biggest problem people have who have been through this experience is the internalized scapegoating, the way that they've taken on that identity and buy into it. That there's got to be something defective about me, or this wouldn't be happening in the first place. I think that's the most deadly part. And for people who have been scapegoated since childhood, that's a given. That's a given that they're going to be coming into my virtual office, because I work exclusively by video, and with that kind of identity whirling around inside of them. And I call that with them, either the judge or the warden. So we spend a lot of time helping them to identify how that warden or judge attacks them, but they view it as the truth. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So those are the starting points, I guess you could say, but that's also the bulk of the work. Of course, in addition to that, usually there's some really important decisions that have to be made around proximity and relationships with the people who are engaging in this kind of behavior. So somebody may have been in these relationships for decades, and interestingly enough, and I haven't figured this out why yet, most of the people who come to me are middle-aged. So it's like they've had enough time to get away and establish their own lives and maybe have more independence and don't need their parents as much, as say somebody in their 20s, to be able to stand back and go, hey, wait a minute, I feel awful about this. It's been going on forever. I have to do something about this. So then they come to me, and somewhere along the way, they have to make a decision about whether they're going to go into more of a limited contact mode with the people that are hurting them, or no contact. And if you're dealing with narcissistic or sociopathic family members, it's often the former. People are looking at no contact, and this can be pretty devastating for somebody to come to terms with emotionally as they deal with the grief of not only losing hope, or in this case it's false hope, of having the family that they always wanted, right, but it's also the loss of the family that they never had and the family that they're never going to get.
Have you counseled people that their parents made the decision to go no contact, and they're the children of those parents, and all of a sudden they're in a situation where they're no longer in contact with the family either because their parents chose to go no contact?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with that.
That would be an interesting study, because that term is so used now. It wasn't when I was younger. I'm in my late 40s, but that term and that, boundaries and things like that are so talked about now. It'd be interesting to see, if the child had because they were young and they were the grandchildren or what have you, or the cousin,
right,
didn't have the horrible relationship, and then all of a sudden there's no relationship, how that would be for that child.
Yeah, well, certainly it's part of the family system, and as you're quite well versed in mental health issues, and I'm sure know tons about family systems, is that what we see is a replication of dysfunction being handed down from one generation to the next, unless something happens to change that, and that's the goal of the person who's being scapegoated, who comes to me, is to try to be able to change that dynamic. Not if they can't impact the family, and usually that's not the case, at least they can try to heal themselves.
Right.
But I think there's no question that this, you could probably look back into antiquity and see this kind of family dynamic in some configuration being handed down from one generation to the next.
Yeah, we did a whole show on generational abuse, and that was fascinating because it does. And even though you can go no contact, your kids are too young to understand, well, what does that mean? My parent went no contact. Now I have no contact with my grandparents, my cousins, my whatever, and why is that?
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very, and that's some of the more heartbreaking work that I do with people too, is trying to, because they tend to be way more conscientious than the family members who are mistreating them, and when they have children of their own, naturally they want their children to have contact with their cousins and aunts and uncles if possible, so there's that second layer of heartbreak there, and the complexity and loss, on behalf of a child who may not be able to have those kinds of relationships that the parent had hoped for. And again, it underscores how much the scapegoated person tends to carry, way more than the scapegoating family system, the value of family within them.
Right.
Because they genuinely want that sense of wholeness and connection in a very healthy way. But it can happen. So, yeah, I hear from people a lot, who have children who have that concern and just feel at a loss.
Right, exactly. What do you say? Exactly. Of course, you want to protect your child if, you came from a very abusive family, and you don't want them to abuse your children either.
Exactly.
But your children don't necessarily, it's a different dynamic when it's cousins and aunts and grandparents sometimes. But that's interesting.
Yeah,
I think that's like scapegoating by proxy.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And, unfortunately, some of these younger kids, like cousins, they're being used by pawns, they're being used as pawns unwittingly in this game, and are maybe encouraged to, side with parents who are scapegoating, or, view their their cousins as part of the problem, or something being not quite right. So, it is just really quite devastating when that occurs.
Yeah, I've had a situation with a friend of mine who was in that situation. He was pulled away from the family because it was an abusive dynamic. His parents did the no contact piece. And anytime he would try to connect with the family later in life when he was an adult, there was so much distress and anxiety and just, emotionally abusive behavior towards him when he would try to reconnect by his parents who did the disconnecting. And I always thought, I wonder what that is about. What secrets are you worried about being unearthed,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that you would be willing to destroy everything for the sake of, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how does this play out in terms of, that covert abuse? Because certainly scapegoating can be screaming, yelling, hitting, physical violence, all of those things, but it can also be extremely covert, and which makes it all the harder to detect. And there's no bruise to say, I'm being abused. So, how do people that, I know many that say, I just felt like I was insane. I literally just believed that I was insane. And the covert manipulation in my family was, oh, well, you're mentally ill. And that's why you have these problems, not that they're covertly abusing them. So how do you wind through that labyrinth?
Yeah, I don't think of those things as covert. I think they're quite overt, but I think one of the main challenges here is learning how to recognize what's going on. The one thing that comes to mind, because I think that maybe what you're alluding to here is the phenomenon of gaslighting,
yes.
Where someone tries to convince another person that they're going crazy. I think that if that starts happening early on in life, then it can be very difficult for the individual to distinguish between reality and what's actually going on. And that also results in a lot of identity confusion as people learn how to not trust their own gut feelings. So I think what I just said there about trusting your own gut feelings is the beginning of the way back. It's learning to believe your own voice and your own narrative. After an experience where all of that was disavowed or denied. And certainly some of those mechanisms like gaslighting, fortunately there's a lot more public awareness about this phenomena as society becomes more on the ball about narcissism. These are just very tough things to go through that I think are actually overt, but people don't necessarily have the nomenclature to describe what's happening or the frames of reference. That this is what people have to heal from because of the subsequent damage to self-worth and self-identity.
Right. Or maybe just insidious is a better word.
Yeah. Certainly insidious for sure.
Yeah. Interesting. So when you're working with a client and you can tell that this is going on, what are some of the things that you have them look at first in terms of listening to their gut? Because if your whole life you've been gaslighted and you've been, you're in this scenario, you don't even know what the heck your gut is, and you certainly don't trust it because you've been told not to. It's like it's like you lived in an upside down world.
Yeah, but I find pretty well everybody has got some kind of rumblings on the gut level. So I think it's like a gradual getting to know that part of oneself and investing more belief and energy in that. I think that's one thing that needs to happen. And another part, because my work is emotionally focused, is I teach people how to learn how to direct the hurt and anger towards the people that have hurt and angered them rather than towards themselves. Mm-hmm. That's a really, really important psychodynamic piece that people have to do in order to be able to heal, is to stop that internalized raging against themselves. If that can begin to happen, then the whole ability to trust one's gut begins to really take some momentum. But like anything else, because it's a learned behavior and you have to reprogram those neural pathways, it's like something that has to be revisited over and over and over again. Those new neural pathways have to be laid down.
Right.
So somebody might interrupt that idea, that there's something flawed with them, and then self-correct it by directing their anger outwards to the person who hurt them rather than inward. And in that way, starting to get in touch with and own their feelings. But then, they can be triggered again by an incident that reminds them of a similar hurt, and then fall down that self-blaming and shaming rabbit hole all over again, So it's like, and then having to climb up out of that through that process. So I find that people go back and forth quite a bit in the early days. It's really, really difficult for people to unpair from shame.
Unpair from shame. Ooh, that's a really good statement. That's so true. And boy, is it hard. I mean, It is so hard to tell a family member, especially, no, this is not okay. Stop doing this, and actually being angry at them, because you absolutely may get this. I have been told, you are mentally ill. You are having an issue.
Yes.
And I have to stand there, and I call it my gray rock of truth. I have to stand there and pretend I'm holding a stone in my hand, thinking to myself, I'm not insane. I'm in an insane situation.
Right. So important. And with all of that projection going on, where basically somebody's accusing somebody else of their own behavior. Usually that's how I define that.
Absolutely.
And if somebody is shame-based, it's going to be very hard for them to defend themselves against not taking on those accusations and additional shaming. The other thing that happens, though, too, is because, at least on some level, people that have been through this are traumatized, is they live in a constant state of low to high level anxiety.
Right.
And anxiety blocks feelings. So I teach people how to lower their anxiety so that they can actually get in touch with the real feelings that they have inside that are attached to this experience. So once anxiety comes up, fear of feeling how they really feel because they may have been punished for it, then things begin to coalesce. But there can be a whole range of other defenses that scapegoats need to work through as well, because they're trying to defend themselves against seeing usually their parents as victimizers. Because as kids, we need to believe that our parents are there for us, and if something's wrong, it's got to be us, and we can correct it, because otherwise, our life on earth is threatened, because we're 100% dependent on our parents. So if we correctly identify them as being the source of the problem, then all of this survival terror kicks in about, if in fact I'm not bad and my parent is, I could potentially die here. And usually this is all going on an unconscious level. Right. But it carries on into adulthood, where people block thinking this, they have a whole range of very creative defenses that prevent them from accessing not only their own feelings, but the right perspective in the situation. Because without the correct feelings that go along with the situation, it's really hard to be able to see what's happening.
It is, and it's equally hard. I know this is one of our listeners actually wrote in about this. It's equally hard to watch what you know is going to be a train wreck. Because there's lying going on. There's people not really communicating. One person is saying one thing and the other person is saying the exact opposite, and yet they're in this relationship together. And you're just sitting there watching this completely unhealthy dynamic go on while the players are in that, I call it la-la land of codependency or narcissism. And you see it. And you're the one throughout the family, like I was, hey, Uncle Joe should not be touching us that way. I mean, that was my role. I was always the one that said that. And boy, did I get slammed for that. But that was my role. But to be an adult and go, there's no one's really going to hear me, and these are adults. So you just kind of sit back and watch this unhealthiness happen, and there's not really anything you can do about it because you're an adult. It's your life. It's their life. And you just have to sit with that. But
I think what you're pointing to is like the utter helplessness of being a child in that situation who doesn't have any options, Yeah.
And as a child, you don't have any options. Absolutely. It's hard, though, as an adult to watch those things happen when you're not being the scapegoat anymore, but your family is still doing its thing. And to see it happen right before your eyes, and you know what's going on, and you can't do anything about it. You don't want to, because that's what gets you into trouble, but to still watch it is like intense stomach cringing behavior.
Yeah, it's very much a walking on eggshells kind of existence. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, so talk to our listeners a little bit about why this was an important topic for you to get into. I always like to know with people that I interview, since my show is really a love letter to people that would be in this profession, that would choose this. So, I'd love to know.
Nicely put.
Right. I would love to see why you chose this as your profession, and then why, you separated this out, scapegoating, because that's very unique. I'm sure you know that, but not a lot of therapists make that a known separate piece, and and they should. So.
Yeah, well, a couple of different answers to that. One is that before I became a therapist, I was actually helping native speakers of English learn how to read and write. And, what I discovered is that the illiteracy was just the tip of the iceberg, and that they had this whole plethora of other difficulties, socially, emotionally, and often had very difficult family backgrounds that contributed to being in this position in the first place. And I just wanted to be able to help them in a more thorough way, so I didn't want to just deal with the tip of the iceberg. I wanted to be able to help them with what was going on below the surface, because although literacy is a pathway to a certain kind of liberation, if there's all this other emotional baggage and trouble that keeps you from becoming the person that you're meant to be, then that needs to be addressed. And there's definitely a connection between failure or not reaching your potential and child abuse and scapegoating.
Absolutely.
And then I have some of this scapegoating stuff in my own background, and I went to therapy, and although the therapist that I worked with primarily didn't really have much of a frame of reference for this sort of issue, it helped me tremendously. So I wanted to be able to help people in the way that I'd been helped. But at that point in my thinking, I wasn't even really, I think I alluded to this at the beginning of the interview, that I wasn't really, for the longest time, I just couldn't figure out, what is it here that really calls me that I want to focus in on? And then I just happened to write an article about scapegoating about 4 or 5 years ago. And I just put it out there, because I have a blog in which I write full feature articles on my, so these aren't blog posts, these are like 2,000 to 5,000 word articles that I write. Oh, thank you. I put the first one out there, and then nothing happened for a couple of months. And online, it takes a while for things to circulate. And of course, at that time, I didn't have a lot of visitors to my site. But then this thing became like a lightning rod, and I started hearing from people all over the world who were saying things to me like, I can't believe there's a word for this. This is my story. I've never heard anybody put it this way before, but this explains how I've been feeling all of these years. And you could tell that this was like a life raft for some people, that they managed to find this. So this was, particularly moving and meaningful to me that this happened by accident, because I wasn't thinking, yep, I'll just go out and set up the scapegoat practice, and there are so many people out there who I know need this. It just I just learned by writing about it, and then I wrote subsequent articles. And the interesting thing that happened here too is that in the comments section of my articles on scapegoating in particular, and to a lesser addiction, love addiction, which is also another specialization of mine, which is also another problem that scapegoats tend to fall into. Yeah. Well, scapegoats tend to fall into these kind of relationships too, sadly,
Oh, yeah.
So there's all this cross-pollination.
I'm raising my hand. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so I just wrote these articles, I put them out every few months, and then people started creating this little community in the comments section of my articles, and, talking to each other and getting support. I didn't really want it to be treated like a forum because, as you know, in the comments section in an article, there's not a lot of privacy.
Right.
So I was trying to discourage people from, disclosing their identity here. But the first article that I wrote has about 200 to 300 comments under it. Of people who are obviously really hungry for some kind of a community around this, needing somebody to talk to. I haven't had the time or the energy to do something like that, but there's definitely an opportunity there. If somebody wants to pick that up, this is obviously an issue that galvanizes a lot of people.
Absolutely, especially now that words like this are so known, which is fantastic. It's 4 years ago when I first started on a journey of knowing about what even a narcissist was, and one that's, a malignant narcissist. It was like there was a lot of info, but it wasn't at the level that it is now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Now it's like, I'm glad I have 4 years of content.
Yeah.
Yay.
And Norman Rockwell is rolling in his grave.
Exactly. Oh, well, this has been so good, Glynnis. Thank you so much. Please tell our listeners where they can find your amazing articles and more about you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Kristin. I really enjoyed speaking with you as well. It's been really fun, on a topic that, nobody would describe, using that word, So people can just go to my website, which is, my name, GlynisSherwood.com, and head on up to the top menu bar and click on the blog. And I've got my articles organized by categories, so they can just look at the scapegoating articles, and they can look at the love addiction articles if they're interested. I'm a trained couples counselor, so I do that work too. And I've got separate pages for all of these things, so I've got a separate page on scapegoating, and that can be a really good place to start, because if you are at the point where you're thinking, is this scapegoating or is this just normal family conflict, then I think what I've got there helps people to be able to separate all that out a bit better.
Absolutely, and I want to make sure that everyone knows exactly how to spell your name too. So if you want to read her articles, go to www.glynissherwood.com, and as she said, right up at the top, there's a drop down under counseling services, and you can go right to all kinds of different things: love addiction, trauma and injury counseling, addiction recovery, etc., but also scapegoat counseling, and then the blog is up there as well. But I would imagine you're going to get quite a few visitors from this particular show.
I'm going to have to hire somebody else. Are you available?
I wish. I wish.
Yeah, I'm just as that's wonderful, and thank you for that. And I'm one lone person here, and I'm pretty much going at capacity, all the time, probably because of the uniqueness of my niche, and hopefully my skills and talents, but also because I offer my services around the world. So people can work with me if they're in an isolated community, or if they're somewhere where there's one counselor and they don't in town and they don't want to run into them in the grocery store, or they want the privacy of being able to work from their own home, or they're in a different country and they want to work with somebody from a similar cultural background. So it creates a lot of options for people. And because I'm in Canada, I don't have all of the restrictions that American therapists have about where they can practice. I can actually work with anybody pretty much anywhere.
That's
which
great.
Is really great.
And that's such a good point to bring up about, that if you don't want to run into your therapist in town, that's a huge point, especially for people that are being victimized through family or through a spouse or so on. You are so terrified of the community and being you're not only scapegoated by what's going on in the family, then all of a sudden it spreads out into the community as well. So having a therapist that isn't necessarily around the corner that you feel like could possibly be gotten to and turned away from you, I've heard that a lot. Not that happens all the time, but just that the paranoia about that happening is huge. So that's wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're most welcome.
And I want to say thank you to our listeners for another edition of Mental Health News Radio. Get ready for it, because here it comes. But first, thank you again to our sponsors like EverythingEHR.com, devoted to helping organizations finding the best electronic health record in behavioral health, and Service Dogs by Warren Retrievers, SDWR.org, a nonprofit organization that provides service dogs to those with unique abilities and invisible diseases, to include autism, diabetes, epilepsy, and PTSD. Until there's a cure, there's a dog. And hey, an SDWR service dog is at work every day with one of our own team members. If you have a question, visit us at mentalhealthnewsradio.com or our network of podcasters at mhnrnetwork.com. Disruptors, healers, technologists, advocates, and most importantly, voices to be heard from all corners of the globe. Thank you so much for joining us.
And now a final word from our therapy dog, Miles.
Good boy.
Amazon has everything for back to school. Zebra lunchbox? Check. Cool Adidas gear like t-shirts, shoes, and backpacks? Check. Triceratops folders and pencils? Check. Laser Cat t-shirts? Check. Get your back to school shopping done now at Amazon.com/back-to-school and enjoy free shipping on millions of items. No need to leave your home or hassle with crowds. Amazon.com. No better place to get everything back to school from A to Z.